So what did the archer say when he was almost hit in an archery contest? Wow, that was an arrow miss. Get it? Narrow without the N, arrow, play on words. Alright, so in this video, we're going to complete our game by programming the arrow. And the arrow is where all the work is going to be done. So first of all, we have to handle our 3 events just like we have with everything else. The flag click, the start button, and when the game ends. But also, there's a bunch of other stuff we have to do. We have to initiate our variables. So the score will always be 0 at the beginning, and the timer will start at 60 and then count down to 0. We also have to create that timer. We have to aim our arrow using the up and down key arrows on the keyboard. And we have to be able to shoot our arrow using the space bar. We also have to calculate points if in fact we hit the target, and subtract points if we miss the target, assuming we have points to lose.
Okay, my fellow programmers, let's wrap this game up. All right, so I went into Scratch. I logged into my account. I went to my stuff and opened up Target Practice, where we left off after video 2. So assuming you completed video 1 and video 2, you're all ready to go. Open up your project and let's start programming.
Before we even start to program the arrow, we have to make an adjustment to the center of it. So typically, sprites have a pivot point when they rotate, the very center of a sprite, like this. But with an arrow, we don't want it to pivot from its center. We want it to pivot all the way from its end so that we can aim it like an arrow. So we're going to do that by adjusting the center, or what I call the pivot point, in the arrow's costume. So let's take care of that before we even start to program.
All right, so what we're going to do is change that pivot point. So the first thing we're going to do is go to Costumes. Now on the upper right hand corner, we see a little icon that looks like crosshairs, and it says to set the custom center of your sprite, or what I call the pivot point. Now we're going to do this one time. So you click on that. Now you can see that the pivot point, or the center, is set to the very center of the sprite. And we're going to just adjust that by moving it to the left tip of the arrow. And as we just discussed, that will allow us to aim our arrow appropriately. So I'm just going to click once. Now if you notice, the arrow moved a little bit, and that's exactly how we want it to be. So if I click those crosshairs again, you can see that now my center is at the tip where I want it. Okay, so now that we have adjusted the pivot point, we can actually start to write our scripts. So let's go back to scripts, top left there. And let's program for our 3 events, that being the flag click, the start button, and the end of the game. So we get those 3 tops from events. So one being the flag click, the other being when we receive start, and the last when we receive end. Now just like the archer and the target, we only want to see the arrow while the game is being played. So let's go to looks. At the very beginning of the game, when the flag is clicked, we want to hide the arrow. When the start button is clicked, we want to see the arrow. And when the game is over, we want to hide it again. Now, obviously, if it was simple as this, it'd be simple. But it's not. So it's not. And we're going to cheat a little bit here by using the game to help us program and initiate the arrow. When we initiate things, we make sure that they always start the same. So we want the arrow to always be starting in the same place, just like we always want the score to be 0 at the beginning of the game, or the time left to always be started at 60 and counting down from there. This is called initiating. So to initiate the arrow, we're going to again use the game. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click the flag to simulate the first event. Then we're going to click the start button to simulate the second event. And then we're going to stop our game and continue to program. So let's do that. So the first thing we want to do is click the flag. And you'll see your start button in the middle of the screen. So click your start button. Now you should see your game board as if you were about to play. The target should be moving up and down. And at this point, we're just going to stop the game. Now we're going to move the arrow using the mouse to the position that we want our arrow to start at. We want our arrow to start in the archer's hand. Now it's very important that the two sprites are actually touching. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. So for now, just take your arrow and move it so it's touching the cat's hand. Now if you go to your motions blocks, you will see that the X and Y coordinates in the blocks have changed to reflect the arrow's current position. And we're going to use these blocks as the start position for the arrow. So the first thing I'm going to do is get go to. Now if your blocks say other numbers than -192, -7, that's fine, as long as it's somewhere similar and the arrow is actually touching the archer. We'll talk about why that's important in a minute. We also want the arrow to be pointing to the right, like it is. So get point to direction 90. And that's how we want our arrow to begin every game. A couple other things can be initiated right here too. Let's initiate our variables. So if you go to data, we have two variables, the score and the time left. We always want at the beginning of our game for our time left to be set at 60. So we can have a full 60-second game. We also want our score, so from the drop down, set the score to equal 0. Now we're also going to take this opportunity to hide the variables at the beginning of the game. So when the flag is clicked, we want to hide the time left as well as score. Now when the game is being played, of course we're going to want to see both the score and the time left. So under start, we're going to show time left and show the score. Now when the game is counted down to 0 and the final event is triggered, we're going to hide both variables. And we're going to use the archer in a different kind of way to show the player their final score. So for now, just when the game is over, we're going to hide both variables. Hide time left and hide score.
Now when we aim the arrow, we're going to have to use what is called a Boolean command. Boolean commands are commands like or, not, and. They're logical commands. Now when we are aiming the arrow, we want to aim the arrow when two things are true. We want to be able to aim the arrow when the arrow button is pressed, up for up, down for down. But in addition, we only want to aim the arrow when in fact the archer is holding the arrow. So in this case, we need to use an AND Boolean command. An AND Boolean command means that every condition, in this case both conditions, must be true for the command to be executed. So we want to be able to aim the arrow only if the user is pressing the appropriate button, up and down arrow, and the arrow is still touching the archer.
All right, so we're going to want to aim the arrow while the game is being played. That is to say, once the start button has been pressed. And we're going to do it forever. All right, when the arrow can't be seen, we obviously can't aim it. So to do that, we're going to get a forever loop. So under control, we're going to get forever. Now there's two ways of aiming the arrow, up and down. So those are two conditions that will be met to aim the arrow. So we're going to need two if blocks, and we're going to stack them one on top of each other and nest them in the forever loop. In order to aim an arrow, two things have to be happening. Number one, the arrow must be in the archer's hand. And number two, the player must be pressing an arrow button up to aim up and down to aim down. If two things have to be true at the same time for something to happen, that is telling us we need to use a Boolean AND command. So under operators, about midway down, you see an AND command, and we're going to need two of them. Now, for both AND commands, the arrow must be touching the archer. So under sensing, you can see touching is the first command, and from the drop down, you can pick archer. So for both of these, we want our arrow to be touching the archer. Now the only difference is the direction in which we aim. So if the player is using the up arrow, we want it to go up. If it's the down arrow, we want it to go down. So here we have midway down the key press command. So we're going to stick that in the other condition of our AND statement. But we don't care right now about the space key. What we care about is the arrow key. So from this one, I'm going to pick up arrow. And from this one, I'm going to pick down arrow. Now I'm going to take this whole compound block and stick it in my if statements. Now what do we want to happen when these conditions are true? We want our arrow to rotate or move. So go to motion, and we see our turn left and turn right. So we want to use turn left or turn up for the up arrow. 15 degrees is too much. We're going to just make it 2 degrees. And then for the down arrow, we want it to turn down or to the right. And that's going to be 2 degrees as well. And that'll allow our arrow to work. Now you can test it out if you want by clicking the flag, then clicking the start, and then the up and down arrows to aim your arrow. Click stop. Let's continue. The next thing we want to do is be able to shoot our arrow. Here we're going to have to use a Boolean command as well. So let's talk about it.
Now for shooting the arrow, we're going to use a different Boolean command. We're going to use the OR command. So we want this arrow to shoot in the air until one of two things happen. It either hits the target or it hits the edge. If it hits the edge, that means it missed the target. Once one of these things happen, either or, we want the arrow to go away, stop the script, and set it up to be shot again. So let's take care of that.
Okay, so to shoot our arrow, we're going to use a space bar as the trigger. So go to events and you will see that they have a key press event, second from the top, when space bar clicked. Now when the space bar is clicked, we want our arrow to move forward. But we want it to move forward until one of two things happen. Now when you don't care which of the two things happen, that is telling us we need to use the OR command. So go under control, and you will see towards the bottom, repeat until. So what do we want this arrow to do? We want it to move forward. So go to motion, move. And we want it to go until one of two things happen. Either the arrow is going to hit the target, or it's going to hit an edge because it missed the target. So go under operator, and now we're going to get the OR Boolean command. And again, we don't care which, if it touches the target or if it touches the edge. So go under sensing once again, and we have the touching command. And we're going to put 2 in there. But now we don't care about the mouse pointer. We care either about the edge or the target. And now we're going to click that in there. All right, so once the arrow has completed its path, we want to set it up to be shot again. So the next thing we're going to do is put it back in the archer's hand and have it pointing in the right direction. So go to motion, and you will see the go to and the point in direction. And it's the same numbers as the flag click. So we're going to go to, in my case, negative 192x, negative 7y. We're going to point in the 90-degree direction. We're now ready to shoot again. So I'm going to go under my control, and then I'm going to stop, not all, but this script. And I'm all ready to shoot again. So now again, we can test this. Once again, we're going to click the flag, start, shoot with my space. I'm ready to shoot again. I can aim, and it will shoot up, down. Perfect. Let's stop and continue.
Now for scoring, we're going to use a simple scheme. You could come up with your own if you like. We're going to add 10 points to our score every time we hit the target, and we're going to take away 5 every time we miss. The one caveat to that is that our score will have to be greater than 0 for us to be able to take away points, because we don't want our score to go into negative. So let's take care of that.
So the first thing we want to do is set up another script, and we're going to be keeping score when we receive start. So I'm going to go to events, when we receive start. Now it's easy. If it hits the target, we want to add 10, and we want this to happen the whole game. So we're going to go to control, and I'm going to say forever. Two ifs. If it hits the target, we want to change or add 10 points to our score. So let's go on to sensing. If it touches target, go on to data. We're going to change, not set, but change the score by 10. Now, if it doesn't hit the target, it's going to hit the edge. And if it hits the edge, we want it to take away 5 points. However, if the score is not greater than 0, we don't want to take away any points. So think about it. We need to use a Boolean command once again. In order to lose points, 2 things have to be true. Number 1, you have to hit the edge. And number 2, you have to have points to take away. So your points or your score has to be greater than 0. So we're going to build that compound command. So go to operators. 2 things have to be true. So we can get an AND. One thing that has to be true is your score has to be greater than 0. So I'm going to get a greater than symbol and stick it in my AND command. I'm going to go to my data and get my score. my score has to be greater than 0. And I have to hit the edge or miss the target. So I'm going to get sensing, touching, not the mouse pointer, but the edge. I'm going to grab the and stick it in my second if command. Now, if we hit the edge and have points to lose, we're going to, under data, change, not time left, but score by -5. Okay, so now let's test the game. Flag. I hit the start button. Now if I shoot my arrow, I missed. I didn't lose any points. Now let's see if I can hit. All right, I got 10 points for hitting. Now if I miss, I should lose 5. And I did. All right, stop my game. It's working well. Notice the timer didn't change. So now we need to create a timer.
And our game will go on forever until we actually end the game by broadcasting end. And we're going to do that with a very simple timer. So we're going to initiate our time left at 60. And then we're going to put it in a repeat loop 60 times. And we're going to wait a second. And we're going to reduce the value by 1. Eventually, the 60 repetitions will time out in a minute. The time left will be equal to 0. And at that point, we're going to kick out of the loop and broadcast end, at which point our game will be over and our archer will broadcast our score.
So once again, we want our timer to be created when the game begins. So once again, go to events. We're going to get when I receive, not end, but start. Now, our time left starts at 60, and we want it to get to 0 in a minute, or we want to subtract 1 every second. So we're going to put this in a repeat loop under control. Going to repeat, not 10 times, but 60 times. We're going to wait for a second, and then under data, we're going to change the time left, not by 1, but -1. Once the time left has counted down to 0, our game is over, and we must tell everybody the game is over. So under events, we're going to broadcast end. And at this point, our game will be over. Now, this is just a couple of things we need to take care of. But first, let's run through our game, make sure it works. I'm going to do mine. You do yours. It should take about a minute, or it should take exactly a minute. Okay, so my game worked. We now have a completed game. The last thing I'm going to do as an adjustment is I noticed when I played my game that my start button was not in the right place. So I'm going to make sure right now that it is in a better place. So I'm going to click the flag. Then I'm going to stop my program. I'm just going to use my mouse to put the start button where I think it should go. There will be another video on how to personalize this game to make it or maybe a little bit difficult. If there's something you'd like to add to the game that I haven't, that would make it a little bit more complicated, a little bit more challenging, suggest it in comments, and I will be happy to create a video for that. But in any case, you have now created a target practice game and enjoy playing it. And as always, we will see you next time.